Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. It's November the 8th and it's 6:30, so I'd like to call the meeting to order. We have a planning meeting tonight, not a statutory one, but it is a planning meeting tonight only on one topic. It is in regards to, let me just get the right wording here for you, the Comprehensive Zoning Bylaw Review, Phase 3, public release of the first draft. And so before I continue anything further, let's just go into our agenda, which starts with our Canadian flag that we'll take a moment to focus on. Great, thank you. And a moment of silent reflection. Great. And our territorial acknowledgement. As we gather, we are reminded that Guelph is situated on treaty land, which is steeped in rich Indigenous history and home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people today. As a city, we have a responsibility of the stewardship of both the land in which we will live and work. And today we acknowledge the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation of the Anishinaabe peoples on whose traditional territory that we are meeting tonight. Any disclosure of pecuniary interest or any general nature thereof on the item in front of us? Seeing none, hearing none, we'll continue. As I said, we're here for one item, the Comprehensive Zoning Bylaw Review, Phase 3, public release of the first draft. And so we're going to kick things off with some opening remarks and some presentations from staff, starting with our Deputy CAO, Jane Holmes, and then our project manager on this file has been Abby Watts, and so then we'll have a presentation from her. We do have a delegation that will be joining us by phone. And then after that, it's back to us to, really kind of communicate to staff with any kind of feelings you have on the first draft, some questions of clarity if need be. I know staff have been pretty good to say to all of us that if there are opportunities, if there's some one-on-one on specifics that you need clarity on, that they're willing to do that. So don't feel both us as a council and through council, of course, to the community. This is not an approval night for anything. It is just to receive information. That's what the motion is in front of us. And with that, I'll be quiet and turn it over to you. Jane, go right ahead.
Great, thank you. So good evening, Mayor Guthrie and members of council. So tonight we are here to release the first draft of the new comprehensive zoning bylaw to council and the community. The zoning bylaw is one of the city's key documents that implements many of our master plans and the vision established in the official plan. The zoning bylaw turns recommendations and policies into legal regulations. The zoning bylaw is aligned with a number of strategic plan priorities, including powering our future, sustaining our future, navigating our future, and building our future. The new bylaw will help businesses succeed, will assist in designing a sustainable city, will help adopt clean transportation options, and will help increase the availability of housing to meet the community's needs. The release of the first draft of the bylaw is a huge milestone for project team. Although they have made some updates to the zoning bylaw over the years, the city hasn't completed a comprehensive zoning bylaw review in 26 years. That's a long time, and there have been some changes proposed to align with our new vision for the city. You will hear from our staff that we wanted to create a modern zoning bylaw that is user-friendly. We know that community members need to understand and find information in the zoning bylaw. And with the updated zoning bylaw, we would see less site-specific amendments at council. We've simplified uses, meaning that we have combined similar uses to provide greater flexibility and easier administration. We've introduced flexible zones that permit a number of building types and introduced mixed-use zones. All this will help streamline the development of the review process. The intent of tonight is to release the bylaw and kick off the community engagement. As the mayor mentioned, there will be lots of questions and comments in the months ahead, and community engagement will start after this evening before bringing it back to Council. Staff will be available for consultation sessions with the community and to answer specific questions that you might have. There will be a series of workshops and staff office hours to help address specific questions for both Council and the community. It is fitting to be bringing the draft bylaw to you today on World Town Planning Day. World Town Planning Day is an international day for celebrating accomplishments of planners and their contributions to their communities, and it is a perfect time to recognize the great work that our Guelph planners do. This bylaw has been developed in-house and truly has been a collaborative effort, pulling expertise from our policy planners, development planners, urban designers, landscape planners, environmental planners, heritage planners, our mapping and GIS experts and technical staff, parks planners, as well as many other departments such as building and zoning, engineering, economic development, transit, and bylaw and compliance. And with that, Mr. Mayor, I'll turn it over to Abby Watts for our zoning bylaw presentation.
Good evening, Mayor Guthrie and members of council. Thank you to DCAO Homes for the project introduction. I'm happy to be here tonight to present the draft new zoning bylaw to you. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to release the first draft of the zoning bylaw to council and to the public to initiate phase 3 community engagement. We are not asking council to make any decisions on the bylaw tonight. There will be 2 additional council meetings, a statutory public meeting required by the Planning Act, and a decision meeting to take place in 2022. This presentation will provide an update on the comprehensive zoning bylaw project, provide an overview of the draft new zoning bylaw, highlight phase 2 community feedback themes, and outline next steps for this project. The zoning bylaw review consists of 5 phases, as shown on the slide. We are currently at the end of phase 3, which includes the preparation, presentation, and community consultation of the draft zoning bylaw. The last part of phase 3 is community consultation, which will take place from now until December 20th. Phase 4 of the project is anticipated to be completed in 2022. Taking a step back, I'll remind council and the community about what a zoning bylaw is. A zoning bylaw is a series of rules that tell us how a property can be developed. Zoning bylaw rules are legal requirements that implement the vision for our city established in the official plan. The draft zoning bylaw is a brand new bylaw. It was developed based on the recommendations of the 2 discussion papers that were released in October of 2019, as well as feedback received from the community and council. This feedback has influenced some changes to the directions that were originally provided in the discussion papers. It has been developed based on internal review and expertise, hiring industry experts for key components of the bylaw, and it has also undergone an external peer and legal review. The new zoning bylaw was drafted based on a number of key principles. The bylaw is required to implement the official plan. This means that a property designated high-density residential in the official plan will be zoned for high-density residential permissions. The official plan outlines what types of residential buildings are permitted, how tall those buildings can be, and what the maximum density or units per hectare can be. Some aspects of the zoning bylaw that implement specific official plan policy are not up for debate. For example, we can't zone a property designated high-density residential in the official plan, commercial in the zoning bylaw. We took the approach to pre-zone lands. This means that the maximum height and density permitted in the official plan designation has been translated into zoning regulations. We did this to allow full development permissions on lands and not require an extensive planning application process. In doing so, we've implemented built form regulations to control building massing, so that buildings have a positive impact on the public realm and support a compatible transition to surrounding properties. We have also placed a holding provision on lands where increased height and density is permitted to ensure existing water and wastewater services are adequate and available. We've introduced flexible zones that permit a number of building types and introduced mixed-use zones. We've simplified uses, meaning we combine similar uses to provide a to provide greater flexibility and easier administration. For example, we no longer distinguish between specific uses like florist and pharmacy. We now consider all these uses to be retail establishment. We've taken a built form approach to control building massing of taller buildings. This includes maximum building length, maximum floor plate sizes, minimum step back requirements, minimum tower separation distances, and angular planes to ensure proper transition to surrounding properties. This operationalizes the urban design policies of the official plan and implements recommendations established in the Urban Design Action Plan, the Built Form Standards for townhouses and mid-rise buildings, and the Commercial Built Form Standards. Recent site-specific development approvals have been carried forward in the new bylaw to respect the process that has been undertaken and obtained council approval. We've taken a Guelph-specific approach, meaning our city planners have been involved in writing the bylaw. We've reviewed what works well and what doesn't work in the existing bylaw, and we've reviewed our own data for minor variances to get a better understanding of the challenges with the existing zoning bylaw. One of the main purposes of the new bylaw is to streamline the development review process. Currently, the majority of developments go through a site-specific zoning bylaw amendment in order to develop in the city, because our current zoning bylaw does not align with the permissions of the official plan. With a new updated zoning bylaw, we should see less site-specific amendments at council. As I've said, this is a brand new bylaw, and it looks a lot different than our existing bylaw. It also looks a lot different than other bylaws in Ontario, which is pretty exciting for us. We wanted to create a modern zoning bylaw that's user-friendly. We know that lawyers and planners shouldn't be the only ones to understand the zoning bylaw. We've added notes, purpose statements, and charts to help the general public understand the bylaw. The biggest difference with our bylaw is the amount of illustrations we've included. Although these illustrations don't technically form part of the bylaw, they provide a visual component that helps describe the text. The final bylaw will also be interactive and allow for easy navigation. The table of contents and sections will be linked, as well as the navigation symbols at the bottom right of each page. Just a note on this, these interactive components in a fully accessible document that meets the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act will be part of the final document. The draft doesn't incorporate all of these features yet. We've also created online mapping for the proposed bylaw. This includes a property search bar and layers for all the overlays, making this information more accessible than the current paper maps. The draft bylaw is divided into 6 parts and 19 sections. The parts include administration and interpretation, definitions, general provisions and parking, the land use zones, site-specific provisions and zones, and zoning schedules. Part A is administration and interpretation. This section establishes the legal framework for how the bylaw works. It provides additional information on transition provisions, which describes how the bylaw will impact existing applications when it comes into effect, and outlines rules for legal non-conforming uses and non-complying buildings. This section also outlines that illustrations, notes, and examples do not legally form part of the bylaw. The Establishment of Zones and Uses section provides a list of all the zones in the bylaw, outlines mapping schedules and overlays, and tells the reader how to interpret a property with multiple zones and how to read site-specific and holding provisions. Part B is the definition section. Terms that are bolded throughout the document are defined in this section, and where possible, we've added illustrations to provide additional clarity. Part C is made up of general provisions and parking. General provisions apply to multiple zones and include regulations for accessory buildings and structures, swimming pools and hot tubs, sightline triangles, decks and balconies, additional residential dwelling units, home occupations, fence heights, accessory uses and complementary uses, shipping containers, as well as many other regulations. The parking section includes regulations for where parking can be located on a property, the design and dimensions for parking spaces, the location of loading spaces, how many parking spaces are required based on the use of the property. There's a new parking adjustment exception for lands within intensification areas. These properties have a PA in brackets following the zone on the map. This exception reduces required parking and adds a maximum number of parking spaces within these intensification areas. New automated parking system permissions have been included. We've updated accessible parking space requirements, added electric vehicle and bicycle parking space requirements, updated regulations for maximum garage and driveway widths, and added vehicle stacking space requirements for drive-through facilities. The new zoning bylaw has 10 land use sections and a total of 35 zones. These land use sections include residential, mixed use, commercial, downtown, employment, institutional, open space, golf course, and park zones, the natural heritage system zone, the major utility zone, and the urban reserve zones. Each land use section includes a permitted use table. The table shows the zones within that section along the top row and a list of permitted uses in the first column. The letter P indicates what uses are permitted in each zone. Sometimes there's a bracket. Sometimes there's a number in brackets next to the P. That means there's an additional regulation associated with the use permission, and that's described below the table. Each land use zone contains a number of regulations for how a property can be developed. This includes the minimum lot size, yard setbacks, minimum and maximum building heights, minimum landscaped open space, and minimum landscaped open space requirements. For townhouses and taller buildings, there are additional regulations for maximum density, minimum distance between buildings, maximum building length, minimum common amenity area, angular plane requirements, amongst many others. We've set up the bylaw to show these regulations in a table layout with an illustration above that shows how the regulation is applied to a property. Each illustration builds on the previous, first showing the lot requirements, then the setback requirements, and finally, the building requirements. Part E is site-specific provisions and zones, which includes overlays, holding provisions, and site-specific zones. The draft zoning bylaw includes 12 overlays. Many of these overlays are carried forward from the existing zoning bylaw, and these include the floodplain and special policy area overlay, the older built-up area overlay, also known as MAP 66, our protected view area overlay, which protects key views to the Basilica of Our Lady by regulating maximum building heights. This overlay was actually established in the 1970s, and through the comprehensive zoning bylaw, we have resurveyed these views to ensure the elevations are accurately included in the zoning bylaw. We've also added the elevation numbers to the interactive zoning maps to make the information more accessible to the public. All of the downtown overlays are also being carried forward. A few new overlays have been added to the bylaw, including the wellhead protection area overlay, which is in line with the city source water protection policies, the Brooklyn and College Hill Heritage Conservation District overlay, the natural areas overlay, and the Hanlon Creek Business Park overlay. Each of these overlays are subject to additional regulations in addition to the parent zone. There are 23 holding provisions in the bylaw. Again, most of these holding provisions are carried forward from the existing bylaw. Holding provisions are identified on the map with an H symbol following a number. Holding provisions allow future uses for land or buildings, but delay development until, for example, local services are in place. Holding provisions apply to a property in addition to the zone regulations. Conditions of the holding provision must be satisfied and the H must be lifted prior to development occurring. There are 244 site-specific zones that have been carried forward from the existing bylaw. Staff have reviewed all the existing site-specific zones, and older site-specific zones that are no longer needed have been deleted. Recent site-specific amendments and properties that have not been developed following an amendment to the zoning bylaw have been carried forward in the new zoning bylaw. Site-specific zones are identified on a property with a hyphen and number following the zone symbol. Regulations of a site-specific zone supersede regulations found in the remainder of the bylaw. Interactive online mapping is also available. I would encourage everyone to take the time to look up your zone and see if your zone is changing. The online map includes a swipe feature that allows you to compare the proposed zone to the existing zone on the same map. You can use the search bar to look up a property by address. The overlays are also available to be turned on and off through the Layers feature. We've also created a storyboard to walk the public through the map features and how to look up a property. Current development applications are labeled as CDAs on the map and haven't been assigned a zone at this time. So there were some common themes that came out of the Phase 2 community and council feedback. We reviewed this feedback and made changes to the direction where appropriate. I will focus on driveway width regulations and parking ratios, as these are the topics we received the most feedback on. The other topics have been summarized in Phase 2 What We Heard information report that is linked in the staff report, and staff responses have been provided in attachment 2 of the staff report. We received a lot of feedback on the proposed driveway width regulations. We heard from residents and council that driveway widths need to be wide enough to meet the needs of residents, and that is often 2 vehicles parked side by side in a driveway. We also heard that some residents are concerned that entire front lawns will be paved over, reducing tree canopy and front yard landscaping. We've revised the recommendations from the parking discussion paper, which proposed that driveways would be permitted to be 50% of the dwelling width. In a lot of cases, this would have reduced the driveway widths from what is currently allowed under the existing zoning bylaw. The draft zoning bylaw proposes a hybrid approach that allows a driveway to be 50% of the lot width to a maximum defined width based on the type of property. For example, it's proposed that a semi-detached dwelling could have a driveway that is 50% of the lot width to a maximum of 5 meters, whichever is less. This allows flexibility for larger lot semi-detached dwellings that can accommodate a 5-meter wide driveway while also providing 50% of the front yard landscaped. Currently, all semi-detached dwellings are limited to a 3.5-meter wide driveway. These draft regulations represent a balanced approach that takes into consideration both the need to provide parking spaces and the need to provide landscaping, street trees, on-street parking, and adequate lot drainage. The proposed regulations are also property specific rather than a blanket requirement within a zone. Our intent with the proposed driveway regulations was not to further limit driveway widths than what the existing zoning bylaw allows. The RL2 zone is proposed to maintain the existing permission for a 5-meter wide driveway for single detached dwellings in line with the current R1D zone regulations. We have several policies in the official plan that support the proposed approach to driveway widths, including urban design policies to encourage the retention of vegetation in front yards along residential streets, to maintain and increase tree canopy cover within the city, and create pedestrian-oriented streetscapes with landscaped boulevards and on-street parking. We also heard a number of comments related to the proposed parking ratios, both in support and in opposition of the recommendations of the parking discussion paper. We heard that the new zoning bylaw should reduce parking standards for apartment buildings located in intensification areas, as these areas are well served by public transit. Some thought it would be beneficial to remove minimum parking ratios altogether and let the private market dictate the needs. We also heard concern that parking ratios should not be reduced, and this would push excess parking to the public street and other areas close by. Proposed parking rates were studied and provided through the Guelph Parking Standards Review, completed by IBI Group. The proposed geographic-based parking system and minimum and maximum ratios were developed based on a review of Guelph's existing regulations, an off-street parking demand survey, a review of zoning trends in other comparable municipalities, and a review of the Institute of Transportation Engineers standards. The zoning bylaw team has reviewed the regulations, and no significant changes are proposed. Minor changes have been made to exclude low-density residential built forms, including single detached dwellings, semi-detached dwellings, and on-street townhouses from the parking adjustment areas, as well as correcting minor technical mistakes. The official plan includes direction to consider reducing parking requirements as part of the parking study, particularly within downtown, community mixed-use nodes, and intensification corridors, where high levels of transit exist or are planned. Reduce parking rates, the inclusion of bicycle parking spaces, and electric vehicle parking space requirements support many other policies within the official plan related to climate change, goals to increase non-auto mode shares, build walkable, cycle, and transit supportive communities, and affordable housing. The proposed parking rates also support the Transportation Master Plan vision, vision and principles, and the Transit Action Plan Route Review recommended plan, which is coming to Council later this month. So from now until December 20th, we will be listening to community and council feedback on the draft bylaw. A postcard has been mailed to every property in the city to make sure everyone is aware that the zoning bylaw is being updated. Keep your eye on your mailbox for this. A virtual open house is now up on haveyoursay.guelph.ca/CZBR. We will be hosting information sessions on 4 topics, including residential zones, commercial, institutional, and employment zones, NHS open space and park zones, and parking and driveways. Sessions will be recorded and posted online as well. We will also be hosting drop-in office hours. See the Have Your Say page for a full list of dates and links to join the sessions. You can also reach out to me anytime to ask questions or set up an individual meeting at zoningreview@guelph.ca. And this concludes my presentation for tonight, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you very much, Abby, for your presentation. I appreciate that. Councillor Auld, I do see your hand, but I did mention that I wanted to go to the delegate first. Is that okay? Perfect. Thank you. And so as I did indicate, we have one delegation calling in today on phone, Lyle McNair. And Lyle, it's Mayor Guthrie. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you fine. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're coming through very clearly. Thank you very much for joining us. And the delegation time limit is 5 minutes. I think you know how that works. And so I'm going to mute and let you start right away. Go ahead.
Good evening, councillors, your worship, Mayor Guthrie and staff. Let me begin by commending Appy Watts and our team for taking on and succeeding in this monumental task. Although the zoning bylaw may be focused on the future development of the city, it's important to understand that it applies to the existing buildings in the city. In my opinion, that was a key weakness of the existing zoning bylaw and resulted in many citizens needing to make application to the Committee of Adjustment for minor variances. As for the zoning bylaw, proposed zoning bylaw, I'm concerned about the way the city is going to administer applications for the construction of an accessory apartment versus the creation of a duplex. Both are now permitted in the RL1 zone and other zones as well. The only differentiation from a legal perspective is that the accessory apartment requires an internal access, whereas the duplex does not. But there are several restrictions associated with the accessory apartment that do not apply in the case of a duplex. To my knowledge, since both parts of a duplex occupy a single lot, the only way to achieve independent ownership at the time is by creating a condo corp. That said, I realize the subject of fractional ownership is under discussion in the province, but that is likely several years away. On a couple other topics, section 5.1, table 5.8 says the garage can be no wider than 50% the width of the dwelling. There are many homes already built that are no more than 20 feet wide, with lots of space beside the dwelling for a single car garage. This requirement means you cannot build an attached garage in those lots because an attached garage needs to be 3 meters wide on the interior, and that makes the garage more than 50% the width of the building on the outside. Perhaps that should be increased to 60% the width of the dwelling. Also, section 511.2 states that the garage may not project more than 2 meters beyond the front wall of the dwelling, and only then if there is a roof porch. I understand this will improve the streetscapes throughout the city, and I think it's a great idea, but as well, I think there needs to be a provision that allows hundreds of homes in Guelph that do not meet this criteria currently to be rebuilt on the same footprint and with the same exterior configuration in cases where the home is substantially destroyed by fire, wind, flood, etc. And that's what I have for you tonight, although I have had discussions with Abby, and it's always a pleasure to talk to her.
Oh, thank you very much, Lyle. We appreciate it as well. And let me just see if I have a follow-up question for you. And I don't, so really appreciate you calling in. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Have a great evening.
Yeah, you as well. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, council, back to us. So I'll start with Councillor Alt and then Gibson. Any other hands going up right now, or and then McKinnon and O'Rourke, and okay, I'll get to all of you. Karan, caller. Yeah, okay. I'll just put everyone in alphabetical order, maybe. Go ahead. I'm starting with Alt. That works if it's in
There you
alphabetical
go.
order.
Thank you very much, Mayor Guthrie. Broadly, these are for staff, but I think that the one person that we didn't hear from that I'd like to ask a couple of specific questions to is Ms. Walke. So I'll just give her fair warning. So it might be that she might pass these off to either Ms. Watts or Ms. Holmes as they've done the presentation. I appreciate that they have. First question that I have is really about the whole principle of what we are doing here, and it's a question of the appropriateness of modifications on a regular basis of a zoning bylaw. So the question is this: in a city that is growing as quickly as Guelph, how often should a zoning bylaw actually be revised or rescinded or adopted? Is there a best practice? Is this a requirement or a necessity brought upon by the fact that we are just expanding as quickly as we are, and that it was fine that it had been that it's from 1995, but now we have to face the reality that we have a new world? That's the question. I think it's for Ms. Walke.
Through you, Mayor Guthrie, to Councillor Alt. Yes, our comprehensive zoning bylaw needs to be updated more often. A 26-year time frame is very, very, very long time in between. Some municipalities are worse. We don't have video cassette stores, and other municipalities do. So we have written one in 26 years, but we do need to continue to move forward. The Planning Act requires us to do another one 3 years after our official plan is updated, and we will be doing that. And then in the capital budget, and if you look in your budget boards, you will see that we do have zoning bylaw items in there for every 5 years. So we can capture current trends and new world ideas, as you said, that may not have been there. Certainly, you know, we're at this point, we're balancing climate change and net zero and transportation and tree canopy and a lot of other things in this bylaw. And that's the lens in which this is written, and we will continue to take a look at that.
Okay, thank you. There's about 4 questions here. The next question actually relates to density, and we've focused quite a bit on density in the downtown and some concerns raised about density in newer areas. I was wondering if perhaps you could comment more holistically on issues of density, and in particular, perhaps you raised the issue of climate change and so on. I was wondering if you could comment on density as we see it in the city right now. Where are the key areas where we should be concerned about density? Where are the areas where we potentially can address density related growth issues effectively?
Through you, Mayor Guthrie, to Councillor Alt. So right now we do have the nodes and corridors model in our official plan, and this zoning bylaw does reflect that and update some of the zoning to match our current official plan. You know, as we come back to you with shaping Guelph, and we're adding more nodes and corridors and recognizing some of those areas that have higher density, there'll be further amendments required for that. Density is spread throughout the city, and we do have several areas of nodes and corridors that capture a significant amount of the density that we have in the city of Guelph.
Thank you. And I suppose some of that relates to some of the micro issues that I'm seeing here. It struck me as interesting that in zoning, we were dealing with such issues as parking for electric cars, driveway width, and bicycle standards, when I would have presumed that we would be dealing more with macro issues such as commercial and residential areas. My suspicion is that these relate to our strategic plan moving forward and issues associated with a healthy city when we're addressing issues like climate change and the inevitable changes we're going to experience in this area. I was wondering if you could comment on some of those. It's still, even though I drive an electric car, it doesn't strike me that putting electric cars into a zoning bylaw really is that significant.
Through Mayor Guthrie to Councillor Alt. So the zoning bylaw takes the official plan. So we kind of have our little triangle hierarchy of planning documents, and we start with the provincial policy statement, work through the growth plan, and then our official plan, and then the zoning bylaw. So the zoning bylaw implements the details of the official plan. So that is where you will find the details on parking regulations and setbacks and heights, where the official plan sets the density numbers. So it's the official plan says 100 units per hectare, but then the zoning bylaw is the details of what you have to have on that site and how our community looks and feels. So the zoning bylaw is the details that give us the streetscape, that give us the height and what it looks like as we go forward.
Okay, just I'm going to pick on this question for just one more second,
Okay.
and that's the driveway width issue. It strikes me sort of Animal Farm-esque that all driveways are equal, but some driveways would appear from this to be more equal than others. Is that in fact the case?
Through Mayor Guthrie, I will say that not all driveways are equal. So it depends on your lot frontage. So we have policies in the zoning bylaw right now that limit the extent of your driveway width so that we can still plant a street tree. If it was larger than that, there's potentially for townhouses, you could not get a street tree in. And we also have canopy expectations that we're trying to achieve in Guelph as well. So driveway widths are dependent on lot size, and then obviously the width is associated with the lot size.
Okay, thank you. I think this is the last question from me, although I might come back later on. Both Ms. Holmes and Ms. Watts identified something that I think is quite important to council, and that is that this particular bylaw will provide for fewer site-specific zoning requests. I was wondering if we could just break that down a bit so that people understand what it is that we're talking about, and so that I can get a sense of what that means for council business.
Through Mayor Guthrie to Councillor Alt. So right now the zoning bylaw, because it is 26 years old, does not have provisions for back-to-back townhouses, for example. So all of those applications come forward to council. Some of our single detached dwelling zones don't allow a duplex, for example, and we know that they actually exist. So those applicants are coming to council to recognize a duplex that may have been created 50 years ago, but it wasn't captured in the previous zoning bylaw. So we're updating that to allow for uses that you're seeing come through council, and also to pre-zone some lands for maximum height and density, so that the developers know what the community and council's expectation is for those lands as they come forward.
Thank you. I saw Ms. Watts looking like she wanted to add, but I'm not certain whether that's the case or whether she was just adjusting her video. Oh, she's fine. Okay, thank you very much, Mayor Guthrie.
So Councillor Alt, and I'll just say this to all of council right now, tonight, just because of the type of kind of process we're going through tonight, we don't have to do just questions, and then if there's any comments at the end, I don't want to circle back unless it's absolutely necessary. So Councillor Alt, do you have any comments you want to add before I go on then?
No comment, Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I believe Councillor Gibson may not be available for a moment, so I'm going to go to Councillor McKinnon.
Great, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor McKinnon, just
Yeah.
let you know your volume was way down. Oh, you might be turning it up now.
My microphone was pushed to the side. So yeah.
Okay,
So first,
we can hear you.
a question about you mentioned about unbundling parking and how this could be affected perhaps by affordability and reduced ratios with affordability, and indicating that it's more of a site zoning issue than something like that would be here. But a question about the site zoning that I have is, with the numbers that are in this current bylaw, if during the site zoning, some developer had an idea to say, oh, well, I want to have more affordable housing. And so can I drop underneath what's in the zoning bylaw? And because of that, I'm going to offer it at a 30% discount. Or I want to do unbundled parking instead of hitting a particular ratio of 1.25. I want to do 1 because they're going to be completely unbundled again for affordability issues. If that doesn't come until the site plan, can the site zoning, individual site zoning, kind of overrule what's in the zoning bylaw?
Through you, Mayor Guthrie, to Councillor McKinnon. So if they want to unbundle parking and they meet the overall parking requirements, that is addressed at site plan. If they want a reduction in the overall number, then it would come to council for a site-specific zoning amendment, depending on the scale of the application, or potentially the committee of adjustment. So if it's under the required parking in the zoning bylaw, they would have to come to either council or committee of adjustment, depending on the scale.
Okay, and so the concepts of affordability really don't have anything to do with this draft zoning bylaw review. Anything like that would be solely up to the purview of the council at the time receiving the application.
Through Mayor Guthrie to Councillor McKinney, so the concept of affordability for unbundling is not in the zoning bylaw review, but the concept for affordability for some other issues are definitely captured in the zoning bylaw review. As we grow and we add 60,000 people and 33,000 more jobs in a confined or a specific area of land, that's how we've taken a look at it as well.
Right. Okay. Thank you. One of the comments I want to make is we've heard that, you know, there's different feedback that was heard on one side or the other, but I would put forward that all feedback is not equal. So if one person's feedback says we have a multi-generational family, we have to live together in a house, we have 4 cars, we need more parking in our driveway because of affordability issues, versus I want the person across the street to have more grass on their lawn. Those aren't really equal feedbacks, in my opinion. I mean, one is a critical feedback that supports the community, and the other is mild aesthetics. And so, yes, having both feedbacks is important, but I think it's also important to weigh the importance of the feedback, which is why driveway issues is such a huge issue. Reading through this, I see that obviously there hasn't been a lot of changes since the previous feedback. I could never support a bylaw that is the way it's currently written. I think we need to look at having a significant change in it. And that's specifically, once again, regarding every single house, regardless of its width, should be able to fit 2 cars in the driveway side by side. And I just think that should be the baseline we work from, not 50% ratios, not, oh, let's make sure there's enough room for grass or trees, because every argument against doing that, there's a counter argument and there's an easy way to get around it. So it's like, oh, well, we need to make sure there's not enough, you know, we don't have too much runoff for stormwater. Well, we allow having pavers on the side of the driveway, but you can't park on them, but it's okay to have them there. So that doesn't change the runoff issue. It's like, oh, well, street trees. Well, we want an extra tree to have the tree canopy, but you can put a tree in your backyard instead of your front yard. Oh, so we don't want to increase the curb width, so we want to make sure there's on-street parking. Well, that's great, but the size of a driveway and the size of the curb cut aren't related. And so for every one of these reasons, I just look and I think the only thing it really comes down to is 4 words: is I don't like it. I don't see other rational, reasonable arguments why we shouldn't allow 2 cars side by side. If it takes up 70% of the front lawn, great. If that's going to help affordability, if it's going to help families, they're going to support our community. Aesthetics does not trump affordability, does not trump supporting our families. And with the prices that have gone up literally $200,000 in the past year on houses, it is just unbelievably expensive to try to live in an area like that. So that was my comments on driveway width. I understand there may not be any changes. It will not get my vote if there's no changes on that. This is one of those hills that I will take a very firm stand on, like I did with the infrastructure levy. There's not a lot of those. This is one of them. I think we are making a terrible, terrible mistake if we don't support the families in our community that have now multi-generational families, that have 3-4 cars living there. And you can always say, well, too bad, get your own issue, make it up. But I think there's an easy solution to this, and that's just allowing them that little bit of leeway to make it 2 cars side by side. One of the other prohibitions that I just don't see it makes any sense whatsoever, and that is the projections of the garages. There are tons of garages that extend past the front of a house. And once again, it's aesthetics, which is not a good reason to impact the built form that we're looking at. And also consider, Guelph is not going to have another 50,000 fully detached homes. I mean, that time is gone. There's going to be some infill, and yes, we have Claremont B, but the majority of Guelph is already built in terms of what's out there. And there are so many properties where the garage sticks out further than the house, where there is a garage that takes up more than 50% of the width of the house. I'm thinking particularly in the South End in Ward 6, there's lots of single car garages or double car garages with a 1,300 square foot house. And that's impossible to do underneath the current plans. Also going with, trying to limit the size of the garage based on the form of the property. Well, what if I want to build a townhome complex that has 3-car garages in every townhome? I mean, why not? It doesn't make any sense to put these limitations. We have very few double-car garages in townhomes, I acknowledge, but they do exist. And there'd be no reason to rule against it other than I don't like it. And again, that's just not a good reason for that. And so looking at my notes, yeah, it just seems that the big issues about this bylaw, because most of it has been solid and it's great. The parking, the built form of extending the garages out just doesn't seem to make any sense, given that Guelph has never had that, and there are so many examples against it. That I think that those things need to be looked at really strongly, and I think we should listen to the feedback, but weigh the feedback that we're going to get. On the positive side, where I'm not going to complain about it, I wish all bylaws were rewritten in this format with the graphics and the example. This is excellent. The election sign bylaw, the regular sign bylaw, parking bylaws, everything should be redone in this format because it was crystal clear on what's happening. So, definitely kudos for making such a really strong bylaw, and I look forward to seeing the changes that's going to come from it. Thanks.
Thank you. And to Councillor Gibson and then Councillor O'Rourke.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. Kudos to my Councillor McKinnon. Way to bring it tonight. Good job. I appreciated those thoughts. I'll just build on them a little bit, maybe from a slightly different approach. I wanted to give some acknowledgement to staff in listening to the community and the movement on the semi-detached homes in the bylaw is appreciated. I think that that's a positive step. I think that really helps a lot of families that are in situations where their property could easily accommodate a wider driveway, but have been limited because of the old nature of how the bylaw was written. So moving from 3.5 to 5 I think is appreciated, and it does alleviate some of the pressure. My focus moving forward is going to be on townhomes and trying to strike the right balance between property widths and driveway widths. So as it stands right now, I have a few questions in with staff, which I think I'll clarify moving forward, and maybe on the one-on-ones about what the future of homes look like in Guelph. So what does a standard townhome property width looks like moving forward? What is it today, and what does it look like moving forward? But if you're looking at that specific bylaw around townhomes, 3.5 meters or 50% of the width of the property, whichever is less, it's conceivable that a 20-foot wide townhome property, which is about 6 meters in total width as a property, is going to get limited to that 3-meter wide driveway in the future, because that's about 50%. So I'm looking at the wording of, is it 3.5 meters or 50%, whichever is greater, or 3.5 meters or 50%, whichever is less, which is the current wording. And I'm looking at maybe a subtle amendment to expand that allowance. Those are some of my high-level thoughts. Maybe those weren't too many questions, Mr. Mayor, but I do have some questions in with staff that I'd like clarity on. I'll leave it at that, but maybe I'll leave with some commentary, just to maybe bring some perspective to what we've been going through for the last 3 years in Guelph. We've now completed what many of us believe has been a 3-year pilot study on not enforcing the current bylaw while we review it. And kudos to Guelph Council at the time for just taking a bold step and sort of saying, will this work? Will this calm down our neighborhoods? Will this settle things down? Will this get cars off the street? And sure enough, 3 years later, we have neighborhoods that have calmed down. We have cars off the road into driveways, and now visitors park on the street, not homeowners. And so I know the neighborhoods in my ward have really calmed down in terms of their ability to move and navigate in emergency vehicles, and the streetscape has not been destroyed. And maybe I'll just, again, speaking to some of the statistics that we've gone through over the last 3 years, the average home in Guelph is now $822,000 on average. The average townhome in 2019, thank you, Councillor McKinnon, for adding $200,000 in value over the last couple of years. It's probably true. The average townhome in Guelph in 2019 was $500,000. I don't know many members of this council that could buy into this market. And we have to acknowledge that's the reality for people and millennials and the next generation trying to buy into this market. Some commentary that is now aged well for myself 6 years ago, 2015, when we were having the conversation about Speedvale Avenue and cars and the road diet. I said at the time, the climate action argument with personal vehicles and parking is going to quickly decouple from itself. And it is decoupling. The fact that the combustion vehicle is on its way out. I think in the news today, Tesla has said in the next 5 years, they are going to be 1/4 of the global car sales. They're now the number one. Model 3 is now the number one car in Europe, number one sales car in Europe. It's signing deals with Hertz rental cars. Like, the takeover is happening very quickly. So the argument, especially here in Ontario, where our generation grid is over 90% clean, the argument that says more parking and more vehicles is going to equate to laggards in climate action it's not an argument anymore. The fact that the personal vehicle is still the number one choice for people, and that will be the number one choice for people for decades and decades in Guelph before transit becomes a more reasonable or accommodating or just convenience. It's still going to be the personal vehicle for a very long time in Guelph. We need to acknowledge that. And the fact that the EVs are coming is going to help encourage that for another few decades. So those are my comments. Again, kudos to staff. I think you are listening. I think you brought this bylaw from where it was to where it is today is a better place. I just think there's still some work to do on the townhomes from a parking perspective. And I think maybe looking into the future at what that property will look like, especially if we're getting thousands of 20-foot wide townhome properties, we should probably evaluate, the ability of those people to put in a driveway that's reasonable. Those are my thoughts. And again, I'm not going to belabor them tonight, but that's just something that I'll take offline with staff in my one-on-ones. And I hope the community will speak up as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. And next on my list is Councillor O'Rourke and then Karan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So through you to staff, I've got a mix of comments and questions. So Councillor McKinnon already covered some concerns that I have about the width of the garage not exceeding 50% of the face of the dwelling, and also to restrict the projection of a garage to 2 meters past the face, and only if it has a covered porch going right to that end of the garage. And the reason I would say this is that, 20 years ago, the city approved the building of the community where I live, and I don't believe that suddenly that's egregious. I think we have a beautiful community where people play in the park and walk on the streets, and they have, wheelbarrows and, bikes and all kinds of stuff in their garage. So I've got some real concerns about the reduction, because the fact of the matter is, when the garage is pushed out, there's living space in the back. So I don't believe that there's any detrimental effect to the community in that regard. I wanted to ask Ms. Watts, can you just confirm for me that the new bylaw would prohibit any townhomes from having a double car garage?
Through you, Mayor, to Councillor O'Rourke. So again, the driveway width regulations are based on the lot frontage. So it is 50% of the lot frontage to a maximum of 3.5 meters. So basically a 3.5 meter wide driveway is going to be a 1-car driveway. You technically need a 5-meter wide driveway to fit 2 cars side by side.
Okay, so I have a concern about that. When the average townhouse, 3-bedroom townhouse in Guelph is $802,000. So very few people are carrying that on a single mortgage. And I completely believe that people will substitute some trips to transit or active transportation. I believe that. I also believe that many homes will continue to have 2 vehicles, whether they're electric or otherwise. So I think that's problematic. And I'll leave that for your consideration and for the public to determine whether they feel that's problematic or not. I really think we should see what the market can bear and what the market wants. I had a question for you about section 5.11.3b, and that's the surface walkway within 1.5 meters of the nearest foundation wall is permitted, provided it's not used for parking, right? So do we have any idea how many driveways in the city have the little walkway? You see them everywhere, you know, have the little walkway down each side of the driveway.
Through you, Mayor, to Councillor Rourke, I don't have those numbers. I don't think that we have that on file. We could perhaps look into enforcement numbers, how many driveways have had enforcement on them in the past, and we could get back to you with those numbers.
So the concern I have with that is there have to be thousands, if not tens of thousands of driveways that have the pavers down the side. And what's going to happen to those folks if they can no longer park side by side? Well, they're going to put one in the road, and then the people from that street will have a transportation study done and they'll remove parking on the road. So if you're allowed to have pavers, I'd like to remove the prohibition of parking on that. Nobody chooses to have, you know, too many vehicles in their front drive, but especially if we're going to limit for townhomes to have only single car garages, I think it becomes extremely challenging. And I think it's an enforcement issue because literally there will be tens of thousands of people who will not be compliant. So a real question for you, Ms. Watts. Can you help me understand, just shifting to mixed use buildings, why there's no requirement for visitor parking in a mixed use building? So there's commercial on the bottom and apartments on top.
So through you, Mayor Guthrie, to Councillor Rourke, the idea behind the mixed use building is that one parking space is required per unit, and then a ratio is required for the commercial component of the building. So in a situation like that, you often have more of a shared parking opportunity. So visitors that are coming can use commercial parking spaces. The idea that when, you know, a restaurant closes at night, you may have additional parking for overnight guests. These mixed-use buildings are often permitted as well within our intensification areas and nodes, and so these areas are better serviced by transit. They're more walkable to surrounding residential neighborhoods, so we would expect that there'd be a variety of modes of transportation to get to these sites.
Right. So I would ask you to consider through the consultation that the parking for retail, restaurants, veterinarians, all of that is going to be reduced in the intensification corridor to about half what it would be anywhere else in the city. And so we might need to also ensure that there's visitor parking for the building. So if you have a restaurant on the main floor, even if people are walking to the restaurant, we hope they do that, you might have a conflict with visitors to the building, and not just visitors, personal support workers or delivery people. But I have a concern that there's going to be some challenges, and that the people in that building, maybe they chose to live in the intensification corridor because they want to take transit, but I don't think it's fair to assume that all their visitors will also take transit to go see them. So I'd like to see a requirement for visitor parking in that mixed use corridor, and it can be lower, and we can talk about how that shares with the commercial property. but the commercial property also is going to have staff and we'll have, hopefully lots of patrons. So I'm very concerned that there would be no visitor parking for mixed use building. And my last question, or two questions and then a comment, Mr. Mayor. So Ms. Watts, you know that this is a concern of mine. I am very concerned about reducing the parking minimums and having a parking maximum in the intensification corridor. And that's now called a PA. And it's because for two reasons. One, for the residents themselves, who are carrying, a condo that now 1-bedroom condo is averaging $479,000 a year. So there's the cost of carrying that. So it's about future residents and an amenity, but it's also about the neighborhoods surrounding the intensification corridor, many of which abut the natural heritage area. So there won't be more streets. There won't be more room for parking. And we know that under the current zoning bylaw, we have tons of overflow parking on Vaughan, on Kay, on Lansdowne, and Malvern. And those streets, they're getting the parking prohibitions as fast as they possibly can. So what is the plan for overflow parking?
So through you, Mayor Guthrie, to Councillor O'Rourke, the zoning bylaw does only deal with off-street parking. So we aren't looking at on-street parking through this study. I think that's something that we can take back and have a discussion with other departments on street parking, and moving forward, study those things together. Krista, I don't know if there's something that you'd like to add to that.
Thank you. Through Mayor Guthrie to Councillor O'Rourke. That's correct. So this is just looking at the on-street parking, or the off-street parking on the private properties. Is not looked at on-street parking. There's options that we can consider for that, and what we take a look at. In the input into this was a comprehensive parking study, and we did look at a bunch of properties and what their parking ratios were and how many vacant parking spaces they had. And that's why we had the recommendation we do, that the current bylaw, they were actually not using all of the parking that they were required to provide.
Okay. So I'll ask a question and then I'll make my comment, Mr. Mayor. So can you help me understand then what the sequencing will be for the zoning bylaw, then the municipal comprehensive review, and then obviously Claremont secondary plan later, because this is my concern. So please tell me if I don't need to worry. My concern is the zoning bylaw will restrict parking for apartment buildings, well, all buildings in the intensification corridor. And then the municipal comprehensive review will come along and say, we can add 2 stories. We're increasing the maximum for medium and high density, which will exacerbate the number of sort of overflow vehicles, right? So what is the sequence so that we can really apply a big picture lens?
Through you, Mayor Guthrie, to Councillor O'Rourke. So the Claremont B secondary plan is intended to be brought forward for recommendation first in the new year. And that will redesignate through a secondary plan policy the land uses at the south end of Guelph. The MCR is proposed to be the next plan that comes forward. And at this point, we're thinking that this comprehensive zoning bylaw will follow the MCR work.
Okay, so we'll know if there's a super density zone in Claremont secondary plan before we say we can reduce the parking in that super density zone. We'll know that. We'll have that sequence.
You will have that sequence as it kind of goes through all the different processes, yes.
Okay, I appreciate that. Okay, thank you. I do think it's important to bring the zoning up to date because we still have some Puss-Lynch agricultural where we know the official plans is medium high density. I'm happy to see, requirements for electric cars, updates for accessible parking. I'm very concerned about reducing the parking minimums for apartment buildings, not only in the intensification corridor, but any apartment buildings throughout the city. And at every single planning meeting since my term of council, I always ask, when do we look at things in the aggregate? Every time. And the answer is always, oh, we do that in the master plans. We do that at the zoning level. So this is this important public policy moment. It's not okay with me to say, we don't think about the overflow parking, and yet we know it's an issue, right? We're looking at all of the properties still to be developed on Gordon Street. And, you know, there'll be room for tons more buildings. So it's not just that the minimum for 100 apartment unit building, the minimum in the intensification corridor will start off at 20 spaces less than under the current bylaw, right? So that's the very basic minimum. They'll start at 20 less than the minimum under the current. So that's 20 cars, and maybe the surrounding community can absorb that. But then the next building goes up and it's 20 more or plus. And the next building goes up and it's 20 more or plus. So I really want people to take a look at the cumulative impact of what is happening. I don't know if my fellow councillors, when you approve the Gordon Street intensification plans, if this is what you had in mind, but I'm really thinking about the future residents of those buildings and the current residents of those surrounding neighborhoods. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Caron and Councillor Goller.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Wow, a lot of great stuff here, and I don't want all of the focus about parking and driveways to take away from the amazing body of work, not just volume and quantity of work, but the incredible quality of work and the new features that have been added, the interactive maps, the searchability, the overlays with all of our other plans, everything from water to heritage to forestry. There's just so many overlays involved. So the incredible partnerships and collaborations between departments is something I don't want to get lost as we discuss, you know, how many more feet to a driveway can we add? And so I want to thank staff for this amazing piece of work. And I'm really excited about some of the stuff that's in there. The alignment with the official plan is a big one. And although I do have some comments about driveways and parking, I wanted to ask a question about alignment with the official plan. So we have an official plan update coming in 2 years, and you alluded to how this puts us into alignment with the existing official plan. But I see the future, the updated OP. I anticipate that there's going to be a lot of change in there as well. Change related to energy systems and infrastructure, changes to high density type of residential allotments. I know we've learned a lot about smart growth. We've learned a lot about what works in a high density area and what doesn't. And I know we've got some really key pieces, like huge pieces of property where we're going to be looking in the OP about whether they're appropriately identified. And, you know, Armtech, for example, is one that's recently come up. So the question in there is, we get all this zoning bylaw updated and then we make some changes to the OP. So how do we get back into alignment then? Will the zoning update still take a couple of years after that? Or when an OP gets updated, the zoning bylaw is updated automatically? Is it a concurrent process? Or are we always going to have these say 2, 3, up to 5 year gaps between alignment? Because it's so great that we're in alignment now, and in another 2 years, we're going to be out of alignment again. So can you talk about the timing of those alignment pieces?
Sure. Through you, Mayor, to Councillor Caron, thank you for your comments. So the new official plan that is currently being undertaken would have to be approved and fully in effect. And then at that time, we'll look at the new zoning bylaw within a few years and propose changes to the new zoning bylaw. So hopefully after 26 years, this is a really big change, and then hopefully we can make incremental changes to align it with the new official plan in a more timely manner.
Okay, that's good. you know, or at least we're not 26 years in the gap. At least it'll only be a very short period of time. So that's good to hear. So I want to respond to some of the comments that were made by my colleagues with respect to driveways, parking, and provision for electric vehicles. I mean, as an electric vehicle owner, I know that absolutely we are transitioning to a vehicle, a new world where electric vehicles absolutely have to be accounted for in the way we develop. But that is for those who choose personal vehicles. We're transitioning to electric vehicles. From a demographic point of view, what I'm reading and what I'm hearing is that millennials and the new those who are in their early 20s and graduating from university or entering the work world from secondary now are not going to be vehicle owners. That they're saying, we don't want to own a vehicle, we have no intention of owning, we don't even have a driver's license, and that is becoming a demographic shift that we are hearing, and there's data to support that. So I recognize that those of us who do have personal vehicles, we are the generation where that was the expectation. I don't believe the demographic data is showing that trend is going to continue. So I'm not really worried about the lowered parking ratios in certain types of residential zoning, not all. Which brings us to driveway widths, and it's really disheartening to hear my colleagues say that there's no reason why we would have these zoning regulations. These zoning regulations are superfluous and don't represent the community, or that some input is of greater value than other input. Because not every argument for or against anything is about affordability or about inclusion or about accessibility. Sometimes the arguments are just practicality of curbs and sidewalks and visibility and stormwater and no backyards to put trees. So I guess what I'm struggling with, and this isn't a question, so Ms. Watts, you're off the hook for waiting for a question. This is more my commentary, is that we're any urban design work that we're doing factors in all of that. It factors in demographic future trends, it factors in car ownership, it factors in urban forestry, it factors in all of those layers. And one of those things is good urban design. And good urban design right now is not car-centric. And a car-centric form of development that may have been acceptable 20 years ago has changed. And that doesn't mean, and I respect Councillor O'Rourke's comments, because I don't want anyone who lives in any neighborhood that was built 30, 40 years ago to think that their form of design is any less worthy of being part of our city and part of our urban fabric. And so that's not the intent of my comments. But we've learned a lot about car-centric design, and it's not all about aesthetics. And we have other neighborhoods, older neighborhoods built in the 19th century, the 1870s, 80s, up until the 1940s, where there is only room for there may not be a driveway at all. If there is, it's stacked and single car. There may be a recessed garage, but the garage no longer fits the size of a modern car. It's now been turned into a garden shed. And so we have a variety all over our city of driveway widths, lot widths, and driveway or garage locations. So we're not trying to find a one solution fits all, and that there's a new suburban model and an old Guelph model and a future Guelph model. We're trying to find something that balances all of that. So I really take offense when a member of my my council horseshoe says that one opinion excludes all families, or that one opinion somehow is not supporting accessibility accessibility or affordability, because that is a statement that just simply is not true. And it's I would not want our constituents to leave neighborhoods a double withdrawal different the neighborhoods that only
Well,
have single
Councillor
stack
Karan,
driveways. So those are my comments,
Councillor
Mr. Mayor. I'm finished on
Councillor
the
Karan.
comments.
Oh,
Yes.
sorry, I'm just trying to help you. You're just cutting out the last maybe 20 seconds. And I just, maybe if you turned off your video, you could just say your last sentence again. Oh, maybe we've lost her altogether.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah, just finish off
You can
again there.
hear
I'm
me?
sorry.
Okay, sorry about that. My last sentence was just I feel strongly that it is important as we navigate through this discussion that we not label each other based on our beliefs on parking and driveways as being against affordability, against accessibility, or against multifamily residential. I think that those kind of comments are not welcome in a zoning bylaw debate. We're here to talk about a huge body of work. This body of work, driveways and parking are really a minor part of it. And I'm worried that this debate will focus entirely on that, and that we come up with these polarizing type of comments, and it doesn't help our staff to be able to move forward with public consultation when we've divided the community into the pro-driveway, anti-driveway kind of political rhetoric that I've seen from some of those comments so far this evening. So those are my comments and my questions. I'm really looking forward to the public consultation part of this, because everyone has a voice, and those voices are all valid. There's not any voice that's more valid than another. And there's impacts to all of the decisions that we make. And I hope that we can have a robust and collegial discussion when this comes back after public consultation. So that will conclude my comments. Thank you so much to staff for this body of work.
Great, thank you. Councillor Salisbury, and then, I'm sorry, I just jumped a whole bunch there. My apologies. I got 4 more on the list. Gawler, Downer, Salisbury, and Bell. And why not Hofflin? And why not Gordon, or no? All right, why not Gordon as well? All right, so let's go to Councillor Gawler, please.
Thank you, and through your worship to staff. First, I would like to echo my colleagues. I absolutely love the design, the visuals of it, the map with the overlays. I think that is fantastic, and it makes it easy to find where you are and what zoning applies to you. I would also hope that we can see this level of graphic design and ease of user experience in other bylaw updates. I think that is phenomenal. I will start with something that hasn't been discussed yet. With regards to floodplains, I was looking for clarification. On page 184 of the document, I see that it mentions what is allowed and what is not allowed within floodways. Could I get clarification when it says outdoor recreational, including small municipal accessory buildings or structures may be permitted within the floodway? Does that mean that we would allow potentially a trail or a boardwalk within a floodplain? I just wasn't sure what we meant by in that sentence.
Sure. Through you, Mayor Guthrie, to Councillor Gawler, can you just provide the page number
Yes.
with the letter and the number, just so I can get to that section?
Yes, of course. That's page 186. That's page E-4.
E-4. Okay, thanks. So there is a difference between the floodplain and the floodway. So the floodplain includes the floodway and the flood fringe, so areas outside of the floodway. So there are some permissions that allow small accessory buildings or park shelters, things like that, within the flood fringe portion of the floodplain, not within the floodway. So our proposed zoning bylaw will not allow structures within the floodway.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for that clarification. During my time with the GRCA board, I checked in with senior management, the GRCA, and I asked them if they would allow a boardwalk to be placed on a floodway, and it was their response that they were okay with that. They would support that. So I'm having a hard time understanding why we would not allow a boardwalk to be placed, say, for a very specific example, on the retaining wall at Riverside Park to extend the trail if the GRCA is okay with it. So I'm hoping that when this comes back to us, we have some rationale for why that wouldn't be allowed. And I know that we don't want to block the dams, but these things can be built in such a way that they break apart if they're flooded. So that's one concern that I have with not allowing the trails or boardwalks on the flood plain. So that's my comment with regards to boardwalks. I'm going to jump over to driveways. I do echo what I've heard from councillors O'Rourke, McKinnon, Gibson. I have serious concerns about the limitations. When I campaigned, I knocked on about 7,000 doors, and I spoke to probably 3,000-4,000 people. Anyone who raised the issue of parking, their concern was that there was insufficient parking. And over at council meetings, I have heard the problems that are created by overflow parking. So I have serious concerns with the limitation, especially on townhouses. I feel that a limit of 3.5 meters is too small, it's insufficient. I would love to see, as Councillor McKinnon mentioned, an allowance for 2 vehicles to be parked as a baseline, and I think that it is very, very important. With housing prices going up in the city, people need to get to work, and I think until we have an active transportation infrastructure built, it is premature to make these changes. I think we need to invest in our public transit. I know we need to invest in our trail systems so that people can cycle to work, but those are not in place. So for the next 15, 20 years, we're going to have serious problems with folks that live there currently, that live in our streets, that are going to be moving into these new buildings, new townhouse complexes, and there's not going to be places to park the vehicles, which ends up on the street. And I'm really hoping that we don't end up approving this bylaw in such a way that then it externalizes the problem to on-street parking. So that is my concern, particularly with the limit on townhouse driveway widths. With regards to the surface, the previous bylaw, so this is the second item I would like to speak to, is driveways. The previous bylaw, section 4, page 12, it spoke to the surface treatment of parking areas. And it specifically said under 4.13.3.3.1 that the surface of every parking area and driveway in every zone shall be constructed with gravel or other stable surface and treated so as to prevent the raising of dust or loose particles, and drained as to prevent the flow of surface water onto adjacent lands. So that is what I wanted to get to. I did not see that language in the new bylaw. So I wanted to ask, when we're talking about surface treatment of parking areas or driveways, do we have any guidance in the new bylaw that prevents the flow of water to adjacent lands? I just wanted to see how we are using the new bylaw to promote permeable surfaces and groundwater retention, so that we don't have flooding. So in general, is that something that is in the bylaw that talks to encouraging the use of different materials or that prohibits drainage onto our sewage system, or sorry, our stormwater system.
Through you, Mayor Guthrie, to Councillor Guller. I believe that language was carried forward into the bylaw, but we'll have a look at that just to make sure. I know we didn't want to make any changes to the permission to have like asphalt or just any stable surface. You could have gravel, so we didn't want to require that for residential properties. So we'll take that back and look into it.
Okay, thank you very much. I think it's important for us to encourage as much permeable surfaces as possible. So the next concern that I have is with the limitations of both visitor parking in apartment buildings, particularly in the intensification corridors. I think that is a significant concern. I can certainly support the reduction of number of parking spaces for apartment buildings in an intensification corridor, but not having sufficient visitor spots, that to me is a problem. I have serious concerns with that for all the reasons that have already been raised. And outside of those intensification corridors, I have serious concerns about the reducing the number of required parking spaces for apartment buildings. Over the last 3 years that I have been sitting as a councillor, I have heard that people need places to park their cars, and the only folks that I've heard say we need less parking spaces are developers when they come to make applications. And I believe that we have to place more weight on the voices of both people that live in apartments and those that live in the community surrounding, who then have to deal with overflow parking. So I have very strong feelings that we should not be reducing the requirement for parking in apartments. As it is, we don't require a lot. I think that I will not be able to support reducing that even further. Thank you. Those are all my comments for today. But again, I will reiterate that I absolutely love the process and the design, and I hope to see it repeated in future bylaws. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Downer, and then Salisbury.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I have a few questions and then responses to some things that would have been said on the car-centric discussion we'll be having, and then I have a completely different issue to raise. I'm just sort of wrapping my head around this parking issue a bit, around the number of parking spots. Now, when we just did the additional dwelling units, I understand that provincial legislation said we only needed 1 parking spot per unit. So 1 for the main house, 1 for the additional unit. Is that not the situation? I'm not sure who wants to answer this. Ms. Watts?
Through you, Mayor Guthrie, to Councillor Downer. That's correct. Provincial legislation mandated us to only require a maximum of 1 parking space per unit.
So I guess, in this discussion, it's sort of, it sounds like some are wanting more parking for apartment buildings than we're legislated in neighborhoods with single detached homes. So I think we have to, that's, you have a whole street of houses with basement apartments. They've only got 2 parking spots. That's all they're required to have, 1 per unit. So visitor parking can be on the street. So I just sort of, we have to think about the quality of parking across the city. And I just sort of considering that as I was listening to the discussion. The other part of that was discussion around stacked versus cars parked side by side. There's no rational reason why you can't have stacked parking. And in fact, most of the older part of the neighborhood is stacked parking. I understand it's a convenience, but it doesn't make it more affordable to have stacked parking or 2 cars side by side. I mean, that's not an affordability issue. I can tell you that right now. Certainly, so it's not about aesthetics. It's just that if you can have 2 cars parked stacked, it makes more sense and takes up less of the front yard than it does to have the other. The other thing, so again, I just to say that that's an affordability issue is completely false. The other part is is around the built form, and Councillor Caron really spoke really well to this issue around urban design guidelines, and there's reasons for some of them, and the whole issue of garages jetting out, and I understand that it works well in some neighborhoods where that is, but the reason that they started originally to say, well, garages should be put back to the face of the houses, so it was a safety issue. It's around community safety, so it's around the eyes on the street. In urban design, it was about so people can see what's happening on the streets and children playing on their streets, because with a garage jetting out on one side of your house, it actually blocks a large part of your view to the street. And so it was all around safe neighborhoods and being to view the street. So I just wanted to bring that up as one of the reasons it was that those urban design guidelines have brought into urban centers to raise that issue. And I support that. The other question I have now, just flipping over to the community amenity areas. So it's on the charts, it's 52. And it says that, this implements the direction from the discussion paper about the reductions, and that, you can have a reduction when it's 500 meters from a park. Now, just because this was part of a recommendation from a discussion paper, does this mean we have to implement it in this overall zoning bylaw?
So through you, Mayor Guthrie, to Councillor Downer, that was actually a response to one of the comments that we got through phase 2 community engagement. So there was a recommendation in one of our urban design guidelines for that, but that didn't translate to a reduction in the zoning bylaw. So the zoning bylaw carries forward the existing common amenity area requirements because that's considered appropriate, and any development that's located within a certain distance of a certain size of a park could consider reduced common amenity area through a site-specific application or a zoning bylaw amendment.
So it could be reduced if it's close within the 500 meters of a park. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, if it meets the criteria within the urban design guidelines and it's reviewed by planning staff and considered appropriate, the recommendation could be made.
I have some real red flags around that. To me, it's better if it's more of a black and white issue. I'm not crazy about multi-residential units or apartment buildings having reduced amenity areas. 500 meters, it's not always accessible for families who just want to go downstairs and play outside or be outside if we want to. This is an affordability issue too. Families are being forced to actually move into condos or apartment buildings now because of the lack of affordability of single detached homes or even townhouses. So I'm just concerned about reducing those accessible amenity areas on site by saying, well, it's a park 500 meters down the road, because I just don't think for families or people who want to enjoy to be outside a day like today, for example. So you've got a 15-minute coffee break from your work at home situation. You can't go to, you don't want to be walking 500 meters to a park to enjoy that cup of tea or coffee. So I'm having red flags around that, and really would prefer not to see in the zoning bylaw.
I just want to repeat that that exemption isn't included in the
I thought you said that you were talking about reducing it though under certain circumstances.
So that would have to be through a site-specific development application or a minor variance application.
But we couldn't put it in the zoning bylaw that it's not, so no wording around that reduction in the zoning bylaw at all?
There is no wording about that reduction in the zoning bylaw.
Well, that's good. I didn't go that far into looking at that, but I'm really happy to hear that.
Yeah, we just carried forward the existing common amenity area requirements in the new
So when
zoning
I
bylaw.
read that, I threw that second, I forget what appendix it was in, I became concerned when I saw the response. So that was in the phase 2, you're right, sorry. Anyway, I've raised that point and I've raised that red flag when you're looking at that in the future. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Downer. Councillor Salisbury and then Bill.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to echo all of the accolades that have been given with regards to this report. It's very readable. There's a lot of really good stuff there. Unfortunately, my ward has a lot of parking issues that are similar to some of the concerns that have been raised by others. So I just wanted to get some clarification on one aspect and some understanding of the rationale to the recommendation, and that is that the understanding that at this point we're on a trajectory that would not permit side-by-side parking to encroach on a walkway beside a driveway. So if we got a 3.5 meter driveway and a 1.5 meter walkway beside it, we would not permit cars to park side by side. So if I just want to get confirmation that that's what I read and that's my understanding.
Through you, Mayor Guthrie, to Councillor Salisbury, that's correct. The walkway provision doesn't allow parking on it.
Okay. Well, if you could be kind enough to explain the rationale behind that, because as soon as you put that 1.5 meter walkway in, you have, for all intents and purposes, checked off all the boxes as to why, be it drainage or aesthetics or ability to plant trees or any number of the issues that are raised by that are already now in play with the addition of the sidewalk, but we don't have the pragmatic use of being able to double use it in the evening for extra parking. So why is that? Why, when it appears that we've got all the downside, but none of the upside with that?
Through you, Mayor Guthrie, to Councillor Salisbury, the permission for the walkway doesn't extend from the house to the property line. I would have to dig and find the regulation, but it's only permitted, I think, 1.2.
1.5 from the house or something like that.
Yeah. So it's giving the opportunity for residents to provide a space where when you get out of your car to step on a solid surface and walk to the house. So it doesn't provide the length of a car. The length of a car is required to be 5.5 meters. So it's not a solution to the parking situation.
So just to be clear then, my understanding is it can be the length of the driveway within 1.5 meters of the house is my understanding of that. Is that correct or is that not correct?
No, through you, Mayor Guthrie, to Councillor Salisbury, it's only permitted from the front wall of the house out 1.5 meters. So it can't extend the full length of the front yard.
Okay, and what's the rationale behind that? Why is that?
So as mentioned, it is to provide the opportunity for residents to step out of their cars on a paved surface and have a walkway that goes from their driveway to their front door.
Okay, no, I appreciate that, and I would that would be my concern. To me, so to be clear, Curzon Road, Westra Drive, two classic examples of an absolute parking nightmare that we've created. Absolute nightmare. A lot of the solutions that have been employed have been the use of that walkway. It is an imperfect solution. But the only reason that we're limiting it to 1.5 is that we are limiting it to 1.5. So I'm not clear as to, you know, any reason why, other than that's what we've said, as to why it would be couldn't be 3 meters, or all the way to, as most people do, all the way down from an aesthetics perspective, all the way down the side of the drive. And I think it's the low-hanging fruit on a very complex issue. And it's one that's very, very, very common solution for the problem in the wards. So that would be my both my questions and sort of my thoughts on that issue. And I wouldn't mind a little bit more consideration as to how we, you know, if we're already sort of 1.5 meters there, why we couldn't drop the extra couple of meters and allow it. If there's a good solid reason that says here is why, then so be it. But if there's not, if it's only because that's what the length that we've given it, then I would sort of, and I'll give you a chance to, if there's a good rational reason now, but you don't have to answer the question. But I just wanted to bring to your attention my thoughts on that. So hopefully a bit of a movement on that, because I want to give credit to Councillor McKinnon and Councillor Gibson. They've raised some really valid points about some very serious problems that we're facing with the current problem. But I will also provide for comments, Mr. Mayor, a bit of a counterpoint to that, because we've created this problem. This is a problem because this is how we've allowed our city to be built. We've built a car-centric community, and therefore everyone needs multiple vehicles to do the most basic things. If you live on, I saw Councillor O'Rourke's video earlier today where she walked down from the intensification corridor and says, look at all this overflow parking. And I thought, I don't know, it looks an awful lot like the West End. And we're nowhere near the intensification corridor. So we've created an environment where you need multiple cars to do the most basic of things. And so credit to staff on sort of looking at some of the new urbanism or the smart growth aspects of the intensification corridor as trying to break us away from a problem that we've created. This parking problem is an absolute direct result of the decisions we've made in allowing the way that our community is laid out, planned, and built. So I'm not talking about sort of social engineering, but I think that we also have to recognize the changes that we're seeing even in the last couple of years, the changes in technology, the way people work, and I just want to lend support to whatever efforts we can do to move away from car-centric design to human-centric design. I really want to point out, it was a sort of a derogatory use of the word aesthetic. It's like, hey, we're only doing the garage is it's an aesthetic matter. And I would really encourage anyone who's unfamiliar with Jane Jacobs to at least do a cursory review. I'm pretty sure that Wikipedia will give you the touch points on that. But built form and quality of life and the quality of our streetscapes is absolutely vitally important to the quality of our communities and some of the issues of our social fabric. It's a heat sink. It creates dead streets. Urban design is really more than just make pretty. It's really important, and so I'm totally supportive of some of that movement in our bylaw away from creating a community that kind of just looks like an alleyway, except that it's our main street. I think it's if we always do what we've always done, we'll always get what we always got. That's led to a climate crisis that's driven by communities that can't do anything other than drive to where you want to go. There's a bit of a rant there, so I apologize for that, but I think it's important to seek that middle ground, and I want to come back to that walkway driveway thing. So we may not want to design cities that are completely parking lots, but that solution could be the low-hanging fruit for some of the most serious problems of parking in the West End that I've seen. So thank you for letting me share my thoughts on that.
Thank you, Councillor Salisbury. Bell, then Hoffland.
Thank you. So a few comments. Firstly, following up on Councillor Galler's comment about structures in the floodplain. The way that we define structures in the bylaw is on page B28. And if I can just read here, structure means anything erected, but, and then at the last part of the definition is, but does not include a sign, retaining wall, fence, solar collector, composter, statue, sculpture, playground equipment, pole, antenna, garbage container, and an outdoor swimming pool or hot tub. My suggestion is that in the definition of structure under Part B, that we include boardwalk in there. The issue of the boardwalk from Speedvale up to the senior center on top of the wall. That's not the only place in the city where our zoning bylaw is impeding the development of our river trail system. So the excluding boardwalks as a structure would solve that problem, and I would hope that we could do that. I like staff's idea of reducing the parking ratios on the intensification corridors, but I do think creating more visitor parking spaces there is appropriate, and I think that the parking ratios for apartments that aren't properly supported with transit or commercial amenities, those parking ratios need to be higher. Let's check my notes here. And on the bicycle parking section, we don't have a definition of a bicycle parking space, which I think we should. And there's an issue with the way we think about bicycle parking in apartment buildings. The way that we handle vehicular parking is that the driver drives up to the parking garage door, pushes the button with the code, the door opens, and they drive to their spot. They get out of their car, they get in the elevator. If an apartment building, many apartment buildings, and without the proper language in the zoning bylaw, apartment buildings would be able to provide bicycle parking in separate rooms or cages where you have to walk with your bicycle through multiple doors, and then you arrive at a bicycle room, and then you have to elevate your bicycle onto a rack in that room. That's not bicycle, that's bicycle storage. It's not bicycle parking. And I think in addition to creating the size of a bicycle parking space, we need to ensure that parking space, not the storage space, that parking space is accessible the same way as a parking space would be accessible for an automobile. And if we want, well, we certainly want people in apartments to ride bicycles, because why wouldn't we? If we don't provide easy and secure, accessible bicycle parking, then the people that live in the apartment buildings won't use their bicycles because they'll be too difficult to get out of their storage space. So I really do think that we need to work a little bit harder on creating the bylaw tone that regulates bicycle parking a lot more than what is being proposed. An example of that is the development on Huron Street, where the developer came to us with lots of bicycle storage in the basement, but you had to go through doors and then an elevator and then more doors, and that just doesn't work. And I think we did the right thing there, where we enabled the bicycle user to ride right into the garage and park their bicycle. So we need that in the zoning bylaw. As for the driveway width, I think that the accommodation from 3.5 to 5 meters, that's good. It's a little bit of movement. It's not as much as some would like, and I do think that that's where we should be on the driveway width. I like the idea of restricting the proudness of the garage door by 2 meters. I think that's a good move, but I did hear Mr. McNair's comment that how are we going to deal with I'm not sure if it's that important, if a place burns down and can it be rebuilt the same way? Well, probably it shouldn't be. But I do think that's movement in the right direction. I don't think I have anything else. No, I think that's it. But good job, Abby. And hopefully you can make those small little tweaks before it comes back.
Thanks, Councillor Bell. Hoffman, Gordon, Billings, and then Councillor Alt does have a quick comment as well. And then your fearless mayor here at the end.
Thank you, Mayor Guthrie. So when you are at the tail end of the evening, there are really no questions that haven't been answered. So I don't have any real questions, so I'll just start with some comments. And first, I'd like to say that I agree with, I think it was Mr. McNair that spoke about this being a monumental task. And I really believe that staff have done a terrific job. I applaud you, Abby, the work you have and the effort you have put into this zoning bylaw. I believe it's been a car-centric conversation, and also I've said this at past meetings. I never thought when I became an elected official I would talk about the P word, parking, so much. It comes up in just about every council meeting. So I see a lot of good stuff in this zoning bylaw. I like the 1 space per unit with the accessory apartments, because that'll encourage more accessory apartments, which translates into more housing, which is something that I believe we all would like to see in the city. I think that the restrictions for the drive-throughs, that's great. The regulations for the EV parking, great. Bike parking, great. I was wondering about no, I think that I'm not going to comment too much on parking. I'm going to wait until we do our community engagement, and I'm going to speak to people and try and figure it out, because I'm still not clear on what's wrong with stacked parking. I know it's not convenient, but I just don't understand what's wrong with stacked parking. So I have to figure that out. And also I agree with the changes to the proposals to the zoning bylaw for the driveway widths. I think that's quite doable. And yeah, I think that's all I have to say on the zoning bylaw.
Thanks, Councillor Hoffman. Gordon, Billings, and then Alt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, coming through great.
I want to pile on the applause to staff for this epic, monumental task. There is so much of it that I agree with, so much that I'm inspired by. Just a quick comment on what Councillor Hoffland just said. I liked that attention to the drive-throughs. That's the only area that I read where I think we could even go farther with that. And what I'm particularly impressed with is the courage that it took for this report, because I think that it has a vision that takes us past the cultural shift that we need to make around our use of single-use vehicles. And it looks like there's going to be some tension there, because there are some of my colleagues, there are members of the public who don't want the days of that to be over. We have, it was mentioned by Ms. Walke early on in this conversation, we have to find a way to welcome 66,000 new people to this city, driveways completely aside. That might mean, with our current cultural model, 20,000 cars, 30,000 cars more, irregardless of where they're going to park. They're going to be on our roads, stressing out that infrastructure, our road infrastructure. And we know, I think we can all agree, we don't want to accommodate 66,000 new people by widening our roads, building more roads. We do need legislation and policy, such as I'm seeing in this report, that supports moving past that car-centric society, as has been mentioned earlier. I grew up in an era where it was just expected that if you were an adult, you would have an automobile. And Councillor Caron is absolutely correct that we are, the leaders in this are a younger generation that doesn't agree with that. Tesla, as was mentioned before, it's to their economic advantage that we buying an electric car is better for the environment. It's better for Tesla if everybody still wants one. So our policies, I believe, need to look at how do we keep fewer cars on those overstressed roads that we have. It's simply not sustainable. And the key to me is something that I know is coming in a couple of weeks, that they should be hand in hand, these two documents, is to, as Councillor Gibson correctly assessed, we need to make improvements to our transit system to make it welcoming enough that you won't feel it necessary to get in that car. And if it's not necessary, if the roads are too stressed, then maybe we won't have to argue about how many inches wide a driveway is, when my hope is that we'll get past the need for 3 cars in a household, 4 cars in a household. There's understandable stresses with property values, cost of housing, lack of affordability. But I am impressed again that this document seems to have that vision that we can move forward with a new kind of a lifestyle, a new kind of a vision that is sustainable for us. So I'm grateful for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gordon. Billings, and then back to Alt with a quick comment.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. My understanding, this is for staff or Abby, my understanding is if I owned a home, it doesn't matter, even if it's an on-street townhome, and I only have 1 parking spot, there's no garage, I have 1 parking spot, and I wanted to have an accessory apartment, I require a parking spot for that accessory apartment, do I not, Abby? If I want to build a residential dwelling unit in my backyard, because you have a R1C lot, I would require a parking spot. If I only had 1 parking spot out front, I would require another parking spot for that other residential unit. Would I not, Abby?
So through you, Mayor Guthrie, to Councillor Billings. So technically, all residential properties require 2 parking, or in effect, there's 2 parking spaces created. The legal off-street parking space is required to be located 6 meters back from the front property line and behind the front wall of the house. So that creates 2 parking spaces. So to answer your question.
So, okay, so stop there, Abby. So through you, so I'll give you an example, okay? So we had an application that came forward in Ward 4, and there were townhomes. So there were no driveways. And so under the bylaw, they were allowed to only have 1 space per unit. Correct?
So, sorry, there was a townhome with no parking?
There were townhomes, but there were no driveways.
Okay.
And so what the developer said was he was going to give one driving spot per unit, and that was acceptable under the bylaw. So there's no way, how can, then I'm saying, how can you have an accessory unit in that when there's no parking spot? There's no extra parking spot.
I think we're getting everyone confused. So the zoning bylaw requires 1 parking space for every unit. So the main dwelling requires 1 parking space, and then an ARDU requires a parking space. We did include an exception. So where there is no legal off-street parking space for a property, then no parking space is required for the ARDU. For an on-street townhouse developed in the city, I'd have to look into the context of the situation. I can't think of any on-streets that don't have a parking space associated with them.
Well, there was an application, Abby. So that's why when I was looking at this zoning, it just made me remember about that application that came forward from the developer, which then again, you wouldn't be able to have an accessory apartment. So if you can check into that, that would be great. And then also in the bylaw, you have accessible parking shall be counted towards the minimum number of off-street parking spaces. But we know we don't have enough parking as it is. So why would we count that towards the minimum number? Why wouldn't it be in addition to?
Through you, Mayor, to Councillor Billings. The number is the ratio that's required is based on the use, and accessible parking is factored into that number. So accessible parking isn't above and beyond required. It's a ratio that's required of that total number.
But it could be, right? It could be in addition to. We could have the zoning that says in addition to, correct?
If that were the recommendation, we could require it in addition to. We haven't recommended that in the draft bylaw.
That's correct. Also, through your worship, there was a drive-through diagram that was in the presentation that we received. And it's also in the attachment 1. I'm just looking, C-45 was the page. Anyways, you don't have to comment, but when I looked at the drive-through diagram, because I remembered it when Councillor McGinnon was talking about the pictures and the diagrams, they were great. I didn't think this one was so great. It's counterintuitive. You've got people driving internally on the left-hand side of the road instead of the right-hand side of the road. But I'll let you look at that, Abby, because to me, that it's great if we lived in the UK, and not so much for Canada. So I just thought you could give that a go. Take a look at that. This was a question I asked last time we were dealing with zoning, and that is what was stated at the time was that 2-year moratorium. So once council approves the zoning, no changes for 2 years. And so I can't remember the exact words in the report, but I don't believe staff commented and said that is staff's recommendation that there will be a 2-year moratorium. So I was just wondering, what is staff's recommendation on that?
Through you, Mayor Guthrie, to to Councillor Billings. So at this point, we're just releasing the draft bylaw, which doesn't include commentary on the 2-year moratorium. The discussion paper does provide a recommendation to implement the 2-year moratorium. So we'll be looking at that a little bit further and looking at where that moratorium should be implemented, if it should be citywide or specific areas, and we would bring a recommendation on that back at the statutory public meeting.
And all the issues thereof with respect to if you do recommend this 2-year moratorium, because I do see it as problematic in some situations. And then the driveway whiz, well, I think other members of council, Councillor McKinnon and Gibson covered it off. So the mayor likes it when people say ditto. So ditto. Mr. McNair, when he brought up the issue of, the existing. So for example, if there was a fire, there was a home in the south end that actually blew up. So what would happen moving forward with respect to, council, I would say, approves hypothetically this zoning bylaw? Could you use, and so what he was talking about was, you've got a garage that protrudes way more than this zoning. The width of the garage is wider, it's more than 50%, and goes on. And that's why he was talking about the existing. So i.e. maybe grandfathering in for the existing homes. So my question is, council say approves this bylaw, then what happens going forward with something like that? Like a fire, whatever. Can you use your existing foundation, or do you have to come to council or committee of adjustment because we've changed the bylaw?
Through you, Mayor Guthrie, to Councillor Billings. There are some permissions within the administration and interpretation section for existing uses, legal non-conforming uses, and legal non-complying buildings. So in the event of a fire or a need to repair a building, there are some permissions there to reconstruct the building in accordance with how it was exactly to the exact dimensions that it was before.
So you do not, for sure, 100% have to go to committee of adjustment.
No, if you're replacing the existing building, if you're looking to make changes, then you would have to go to committee of adjustment.
Okay. And then Mr. McNair brought up some other bullet points, but he also said that he had been working with you, Abby. So, there was the whole accessory apartment versus the duplex and the internal access and all that. So are you thinking of changing that because of his comments, or are you just saying, no, what you have in the proposed bylaw, you're keeping with that?
So through you, Mayor Guthrie, to Councillor Billings, the additional residential dwelling units zoning bylaw amendment was just approved in December of last year. So it is a very new bylaw that we've just reviewed. We've carried forward the exact same regulations. The reason that the internal connection for an apartment within the primary dwelling was included was a safety issue. That's something that we heard from fire that was important to maintain, and so we kept that. So we won't be looking at making changes to that part of the bylaw.
And did you, through your worship, did you see his point with respect to the garage width and maybe bumping it up to 60% instead of 50%?
So that's something that we'll take back, and we'll continue to hear from the public and council and look at any appropriate changes and bring that forward at the statutory public meeting.
Okay, thanks, Abby.
Councillor Alt, did you want to bring us home there? You did start us off with questions and indicated you might want to have comments at the end, so go right ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Guthrie. Can you hear me okay? Thank you. First of all, thank you very, very much. My comments are really founded on the fact that as I was listening to this, If somebody were tuning in occasionally, I think that they would believe that we are discussing a parking bylaw as opposed to a comprehensive zoning bylaw. That's to replace one from the 1990s, and that is a concern for me. I can only infer from that everything beyond concerns about parking is more than satisfactory with everyone on council, and so hats off to staff for that. My only concern, of course, is that if this tends to hang on parking for its approval, I wonder what staff will be left with at the end of the day. So let's hope that we will be moving this forward. The reason that parking has become such an issue, however, is that from between about 1950 and about 1990, we have not planned appropriately to reduce the dependence of our society, Guelph, Canada, Ontario, the world, on its dependence upon automobiles. And I think perhaps we can learn some lessons from the 1950s, that in the 1950s in Guelph, people walked to work and they lived near their employers. And I think in some senses, what this is offering us is an opportunity to rediscover some of the 1950s. Not everything, and some of that's good. We're not going to return to the W.C. Woods or to the Armcos or to the fiberglass or to the Imicos or to downtown or people working necessarily at the hospitals. But those people lived and worked in their neighborhoods and they walked. And they were subsidized by an effective but small public transit system. There were 7 buses in Guelph in the 1950s and 60s, and that was it. It managed to get people around. And that was a good thing. I look forward to the grid pattern that we are currently developing for the bus system that should provide us with an alleviation to that dependence that we do have upon cars. We need to embrace commercial zones and local manufacturing in various areas of the city, not the heavy industry that I talked about in the past. And we need to remember that those heavy industries in the past did not even have parking lots for the people that worked there. W.C. Woods did not have one in the 1950s and 60s. They built it as the car became a necessity for people, as people moved to the burbs. Imico did not. Fiberglass did not. None of them did. And what we created were gray zones of asphalt, where we took land out of production and we took green spaces out of use so that we could park vehicles. We became heavily addicted in some senses to those. So let's not forget about all of that as we are dealing on the crux of a crisis with the environment in Glasgow today. And as 7 generations forward, we're going to be dealing with this. We have an opportunity to approve a comprehensive bylaw that will address issues of living and places to grow, places to live, not places to park. And we as a council have a responsibility to ensure that while there might be things that we don't like about parking that are contained within this, we do not want to throw the bylaw out with the bathwater.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Ault. And thank you for the history lesson going down memory lane. Some of us were not born in the 1950s, so I appreciate that. Thank you. All right. So I've some questions and some comments. So let me just hit them off here. Then we're at the end of the evening. Abby, accessory buildings on industrial land seems to be indicated that if another building needs to be built, it can't be built higher than the existing main building. I believe I read that right. So does that mean if it has to be higher, that, and let's say it's in an industrial zone, so it's not abutting against any residential, is that something that they would, depending on what they're asking for, they would have to either come to council or to committee of adjustments? And if I could, sorry, Abby, I'm just trying to get some context, and maybe my context is exaggerated, and my apologies if it is. But I'm just trying to think about expansion and retention of businesses in our city. So they want to expand. I want them to stay here. We all do. And we want jobs to be here and they need to build something on the land that they have, but it might be taller than the existing main building. Do they have to then jump through hoops? Because I would certainly, I'm just trying to make it easy for these businesses to be able to build new things on the land that they have to continue the work that they do.
Sure. So to you, Mr. Guthrie, the accessory buildings and structures in employment lands, this is an additional permission in this section that allows them to be higher than other accessory buildings and structures throughout the city. Okay. And this is actually an existing regulation that's been carried forward. So we could look and see if it's been an issue. We did review minor variance applications and identify issues with the bylaw. I don't recall that this was an issue that we have, but we can do a little bit more digging into that.
Okay, thank you. And just so you know, I've never heard of it being an issue either. Ever. I just thought how I read it in the proposed, I guess I'm looking for clarity. So thank you. If you could do that, that'd be great. And then I do have a straight up affordability zoning proposal / question. And that is, and I want to give credit where I stole this from I would call him my friend, Mayor Lehman from Barrie and their council. They just approved unanimously to allow residential on institutional land because the faith communities and other communities in that area, they want to help with housing. And they don't want to have to jump through a bunch of hoops from a zoning perspective. And a lot of faith communities have land and they want to actually help with this. Is this the right area where we could look at as of right residential zoning on institutional lands so that homes can be built?
So to Mayor Guthrie, this is something that we can look into. I think this was raised when we were writing the bylaw. We did do a place of worship review within the past few years that looked at the lands that we have had.
I remember that,
yeah. In the city. So we can have a look back at the recommendations of that report and get back to you with an answer on that.
Councillor Cron, did you want to say something on that point just before I go on with the rest of what I had?
Yeah, I had an answer actually, if it helps. So
sure.
Residential can be allowed on an institutional zone in the provincial framework if it's directly tied to the core mission of the institution. So the example, because I have that other hat, is that university residences can be built on institutional land because they're directly tied to the core mission. They're also exempt from the Residential Tenancies Act, or partially exempt. Same with a nurse's residence at St. Joe's. It was directly tied to educating nurses, so it was allowed as a residence because it was tied to the institutional use. But I believe, and again, I'm glad Ms. Watts is going to confirm this and the planning department's going to confirm it, but if it's residential and it's not directly church related, the other thing is that institutions aren't taxed. They don't pay municipal property taxes. And that's why those institutional uses must be tied to the institution, because otherwise they're subject to the heads and beds levy, and we don't want to get into that quagmire. But I will let planning staff take that away. I just thought that would
No, that's great input, and I appreciate. I did not know. I knew a little bit of that, but not all of it. So I really do appreciate that. Abby, if you take what Councillor Cron said and my question away and figure it out. Thank you. That was one of my questions. So thank you. And then I have a question now. Some municipalities are, and it's very, very few, I will say that out loud, but some of them are being pretty bold and allowing as of right zoning in already existing residential areas for duplexes, triplexes, even quad, as of right, to help with housing and I'm wondering if that was examined by you at all.
Yeah, to you, Mr. Guthrie. So we have looked at the residential building permissions within residential zones, and we have increased the types of built form you can have within a zone. So you no longer have a single detached zone. You have a residential zone that now allows single detached semis or duplexes. We also have a greater mix of residential zones within our different areas of the city. So you'll most likely see some consolidation of land and permissions for townhouses and things like that as infill opportunities.
Okay. Okay, but only if I could just get clarity off the top of your head, is it just townhouses or like duplexes, or would a triplex, would a quad be allowed within this zoning proposed?
Right. Yeah, that just made me remember too that what we did through this review is we actually previously areas of the city were just blanket zoned for single detached dwellings. It didn't recognize what was actually there on the ground. So
Yeah.
we did a more thorough review, and we identified through impact data where existing triplex and multi-unit buildings are in our built-up areas, and so we've actually zoned those for apartment buildings and recognized that use.
Okay, and what triggers, just based on that answer, what triggers it to be an apartment use? Is it 3? Is it 4? Is it height?
It's 3 or more units.
It's 3 or more. Okay. Thank you. I think that was maybe all of the questions that I had, because some of them were also answered, so I appreciate that. So just comments then, and some of them, of course, were already mentioned. I will say that with the parking reductions within zones, intensification zones, I actually don't mind that, especially around the identified, as it's been for many years, commercial nodes. And I can see the problems of, as described by Councillor O'Rourke as example, of the added continual issue, not looking at maybe more as a more wholesome issue. I can actually really fully understand that. And the fact is it's not like a crystal ball moment for really any of us. You literally could drive there today and see the issue. So it exists. So, but around commercial nodes, and of course in the downtown core as an example, I don't mind that at all. So just thought I'd throw that out as a comment. The other thing is, I think I appreciated Councillor Salisbury, if I could just say that his commentary about, and I wrote it down here, some middle ground here around the issue around parking. I think he raised really good points about, the 1.5 meters and that issue. And again, it's not a crystal ball moment. Like you literally could drive there now and see the problems. And that did trigger a question for me, which is, if we approved whatever the new zoning bylaw is, Abby, what happens to people that are then not in conformity? Like if we literally have thousands of people that have actually added that extra strip on their driveways, like are they immediately out of conformity then and subject to fines and like prosecution like we were seeing a few years ago?
So to you, Mayor Guthrie, I would say that those are probably properties that aren't in compliance with the existing zoning bylaw today. So that is an enforcement issue that would have to be determined moving forward. I would also add, because this question came up, we have situations in the city where there are legal non-conforming driveway widths. So some older areas of the city or areas that were previously within the township that were annexed into the city may have wider driveways than what would be permitted today. And those become legal non-conforming. They're permitted to continue to stay that width. They just can't further widen those driveways.
Okay. So nothing like that would be proposed as a legal non-conforming over the last 26 years, and then for all those existing ones, and then it's new moving forward, or like it's sometimes stated like a grandfathered clause. That's not an option.
We can take
Council
that back
directed it?
and,
Okay,
and talk
okay.
to zoning staff and enforcement about that and come back with a response.
Okay. And I'm just thinking about enforcement issues around that too, right? Like one of the nice things, in my opinion, has been just not the uproar that we've all experienced as a council in the last 3 years when we've had the temporary use bylaw in place, and the enforcement has just been able to go to other, in my opinion, pressing issues than a driveway width issue. And if all of a sudden it's changed, I can just see it being an enforcement issue again. And then the other comment I had is that, you know, I think urban design and built form commentary that I heard from council, uh, it does matter. And I think it matters because as a council, we unanimously approved, I think it was unanimous if my memory serves right, the commercial urban design. Like if we have you know, the kind of willingness to see the merit in the commercial urban design policies, I think there's equal weight we have to give on the residential in our neighborhoods too. Now, how that comes about, I think is a great discussion to have, and I'm open to that. But I think we have to balance if we are okay as a council to say, well, urban design matters on commercial units, and then it doesn't apply as much on the residential side. I think there's some merit to making sure that it's not a free for all is what I'm trying to say on that one. And then I would say that you know, and this is my last comment, so thanks everybody. Actually, two more things. The first one is just on, you know, the issue of sort of, you know, one side of, you know, is strong on their opinions on this driveway issue, and the other one might not be. I think there is some middle ground here. I just want to say that I really think that there is, and I am kind of strong on the one side. I've always been there a little bit, but I want us to try to come together where we're balancing things as much as we can. And you know, I don't want people to be labeled as just political rhetoric when some people are actually just trying to be the voice of their constituents that are reaching out to them. And I don't want the voice to also move into political rhetoric either. So it's that balance of everything on that too. And I can feel a little bit of that vibe tonight, where I think our staff are going to go away and try their best on coming back on balancing that, hopefully. And then the last thing is, I just want to say, and I will not say ditto here because I wanted to say it out loud. Yeah, this is one of the best documents I've ever seen. It is so easily laid out, and it's quite good. You know, I've often say you got to dumb it down for this mayor when it comes to reading things and zoning and all this kind of stuff. And you did good. If I can understand it, I'm sure a lot of other people can understand it. So I just want to really say thank you. Abby, you did a good work, and all the rest of the staff that have as well, Krista and your whole crew. But you know, I know that there's probably designers that helped even with how it is laid. I want to acknowledge them too. You know, they take the complicated and they put it into a really easy thing for us. So I really appreciate that. And I will say, I have asked this about many issues before in the past. Is there any way that we can do that faster? Is there any way we can speed this up? Now that I see this draft in front of me, I fully understand why it took as long as it did. and I can see the work that was there. And so as somebody who is always wanting things to go faster, I can now understand on this why it's taken a while to want to get it right. And I appreciate that work as the mayor, and I'm sure I'm speaking on behalf of council on that one. So really, really appreciate it. Okay, let's just go from there if that's okay. Sorry, Councillor Gibson and then Hoffman.
Just moving receipt, Mr. Mayor.
All right. Is Hoffman
Second.
going to be my seconder tonight again? All right. You're my number one seconder. Thank you very much. I'm keeping a tally here. No, it's kidding. All right. Is there any other comments before I call the vote? Hopefully not. But okay, don't hear or see any hands. So all in favor, show me your hands on the screen there for receipt. Looks unanimous to me. Clerk's giving me the nod. That's great. Is there any, usually you have to give me a heads up on announcements, but is there any like town halls or anything coming up I should be aware of, or the public should be aware of? No? Okay. Oh, Councillor O'Rourke? Oh yeah, I think you and Councillor McKinnon have something, right?
Yes, Councillor McKinnon and I are going to host a virtual town hall on the 24th of November, and that's from 7 to 9. So we'll be publishing some stuff soon.
All right, sounds great. And who wants to move adjournment for me? All right, Councillor O'Rourke.
We have to do the bylaws.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I really jumped ahead there. It's my first day. Thank you, Councillor Hoffman. Are you willing to move? Are you, instead of being a seconder, would you be willing to move the bylaws?
Yes, I will move that bylaws number 2021-20641 to 2021-20642 be passed, and that would be seconded by Councillor Alt.
Perfect. All right. Anything on those bylaws, anybody? No. All in favor, show me those hands. Looks unanimous to me. All right. For real this time. Not like that fake adjournment. A real adjournment. Who's going to move that one for me? Billings. And I'm going to Councillor Hoffman on the seconder. All in favor for that. All right. It's passed. We're out of here. Park in your driveways. Park correctly, everybody. And have a great night. Take care. Bye-bye.